Welcome back to the most news in the morning. The nation's first African-American Attorney General, Eric Holder, drew a lot of attention for the comments that he made when he said we're a, quote, nation of cowards when it comes to race. Well, President Obama took issue with his choice of words. Here's what he said about it in an interview with the New York Times.
I think it's fair to say that if I had been advising my Attorney General, we would have used different language. I'm not somebody who believes that constantly talking about race somehow solves racial tensions.
All right, well, should the president, though, be doing more to engage the nation in a dialogue about race? Joining us from Washington, Michael Fauntroy. He's a professor of policy who specializes in race and politics at George Mason University. Thanks so much for being with us this morning, Michael. So it sounds like the president was taking the Attorney General to task. What was your reaction to President Obama's remarks?
Well, there are a couple of things there. The first one, he said if I were advising my Attorney General, which struck me as pretty curious. It seemed like he's clearly not happy about the comment. But the other point that really needs to be emphasized here is his notion that he says he's not someone who believes that constantly talking about race will somehow solve these problems. But there's a whole lot of space between constantly talking about race and never talking about race. And the president, I think, is uniquely positioned to find some space in between those two poles to move the country into a more informed and necessary dialogue on race.
He also said, though, that he took issue with the wording. So do you think that he has a point in it, dwelling too much on the things that divide us instead of the things that we actually agree on, make it harder for us to move forward?
Well, I don't think there's any question that the world in which I now live is substantially better than the world in which my father came up in. And my wife and I have toddlers, and their world is much better than the world in which I was born in. So we ought to celebrate the successes, but we ought not lose sight of the serious and systemic problems going forward. And it's my hope that if the president is not comfortable taking the lead on that he will allow others in the administration to speak truth on this issue.
Here's something interesting. I'm glad we had you on to talk about this. Political and cultural analysts are saying that, like other politicians before him, even his predecessor, President Obama uses what they call dog whistle politics. This is when leaders use language that will connect with one targeted group, yet it's not often recognized as significant by the public at large. And analysts say that President Obama uses dog whistle politics as a way to connect with African Americans and the African American community. So here's one example they point to. This is the president at Ben's Chili Bowl in Washington.
No, I got it. There you go. You just keep that. Where's my tip? You got my tip? No, we straight.
All right, so explain what he was saying and what's going on there with that. You're laughing right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's borderline hysterical to me. This is sort of the classic barbershop talk. We clip some of the language, but we know what we're saying when we're talking to one another. And he would never use that sort of language in a cabinet meeting, but he knows that he can go to Ben's Chili Bowl or any barbershop in the city, and everybody would understand exactly what he was saying. And this is the sort of thing that adept politicians, without regard to race, do all the time. And sometimes a dog whistle could be in the color of a tie. It could be in some other non-verbal cue that also is used to convey a message.
And let's show you one more example so people get what we're talking about. This is at a campaign event in Raleigh, North Carolina last April. Let's watch.
When you're running for the presidency, then you've got to expect it. And, you've just got to kind of let it, That's what you got to do.
There you go. So it's a dirt off your shoulder. Of course, if we all listen to Jay-Z, we know what he's talking about. But yes, but as a whole, perhaps people don't. How do you go from that being effective to not being considered pandering?
Well, the key is to not overuse it. There are all these sorts of affectations that candidates take on as they travel around the world, around the country. It's not unusual for candidates to get a southern twang when they hit the South,
right?
For example, to speak to groups. So the key is to not overuse it because it will be seen as pandering.
I got you. And, his predecessor, as we said, did it as well with certain things. People said that the culture of life, using that in the political lexicon, also was an example that he got. I'm one of you as an evangelical Christian, and so it's not just about race, but it's about being able to speak to one certain group and let them know I'm with you.
Oh, without question. President Reagan, in his then Governor Reagan in his 1980 campaign used all of these allusions to the concept of American exceptionalism when he talked about America being the shining city on the hill. To people who are religious conservatives, that phrase, shining city on the hill, means something.
Right. All right, Michael Fauntleroy, great to have you with us. Professor at George Mason University, author of Republicans in the Black Vote. Maybe we'll get you to talk about the GOP next time you're on. Thanks so much for being with us.
All right.
It's 47 minutes after the hour.
New victims of the foreclosure.